On August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m., at an altitude of 600 meters above the Japanese city of Hiroshima, something happened that humanity had never seen before. In 1/10 of a second, the temperature at the epicenter reached 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius, about half the temperature of the sun's surface. Everything within a kilometer radius evaporated instantly. Only the shadows of people remained on the concrete walls, literally shadows burned by the light pulse. In 9 seconds, a city ceased to exist. 3 days later, it happened again. This is the only case in human history when nuclear weapons were used against civilians. To understand why this happened, we need to go back a few years. Before the disaster, by the summer of 1945, World War II had been raging for almost 6 years. In Europe, it ended on May 8th with Germany's surrender, but fighting continued in the Pacific. Japan was in a desperate situation but refused to surrender. American military strategists looked at the map and saw a problem. The war with Japan was being fought using the island hopping method. Each island cost thousands of lives. The Battle of Okinawa, which ended on June 22, 1945, claimed the lives of 12,000 American soldiers and about 100,000 Japanese, including tens of thousands of civilians. The Japanese used kamikaze tactics, mass suicides of civilians, and fanatical resistance to the last. At the same time, since 1942, the Manhattan Project, a program to create an atomic bomb, had been carried out in absolute secrecy. 130,000 people worked on it in different parts of the United States, most of whom did not even know what they were creating. The project's budget was $2 billion, which is about $30 billion in today's money. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb test, codenamed Trinity, took place in the New Mexico desert. Robert Oppenheimer, the project's scientific director, later recalled a line from the Hindu sacred text Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Final decision. After Franklin Roosevelt's death on April 12, 1945, Harry Truman became president. Truman faced a dilemma. On the one hand, there was the invasion of Japan, which would result in enormous casualties. On the other hand, there was a new weapon of incredible power that could force Japan to surrender without invasion. On July 26th, at the Potsdam Conference, the Allies issued an ultimatum to Japan: immediate unconditional surrender, or swift and complete destruction. The wording was deliberately vague. The Japanese were not informed of the existence of the atomic bomb. Japanese Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki responded with the word mokusatsu, which can be translated as to kill with silence or to ignore with contempt. On July 25th, General Karl Spaatz received a written order. As soon as the weather permitted after August 3rd, dropped the first special bomb on one of the following targets: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, or Nagasaki. Hiroshima was not chosen by chance. It was an important military center. The headquarters of the Second Main Army, responsible for the defense of southern Japan, was located here. The city had large military warehouses and a port for shipping troops. The population was about 350,000. In addition, Hiroshima had remained virtually untouched by bombing, which made it possible to accurately assess the effect of atomic weapons. The B-29 bomber was named Enola Gay, together with 2 escort planes, one conducting scientific observations, the other taking photographs. They took off from Tinian Island at 2:45 a.m. on August 6th. The bomb was called Little Boy. It was a cannon-type weapon based on uranium-235. It was 3 meters long, 71 centimeters in diameter, and weighed 4,400 kilograms. Its power was about 15 kilotons in TNT equivalent. At 8:17 a.m., the bomb was dropped from an altitude of 9,400 meters. During the 43 seconds of its descent, radar altimeters measured the distance to the ground. At an altitude of 600 meters, the detonator was activated. First, there was a flash of light. The brightness of the flash was several times greater than that of the sun. People up to 4 kilometers away suffered burns to their retinas even with their eyes closed. Roofs of houses burst into flames, and people's black clothes caught fire right on their bodies. One person, who was 1.5 kilometers from the epicenter, survived only because he was in the basement of a bank with concrete walls at the moment of the explosion. A second later, a shock wave arrived, a wave of compressed air moving at the speed of sound. All wooden buildings within a radius of 2 kilometers were destroyed. Of the 76,000 buildings, 70,000 were destroyed or seriously damaged. One woman, Hirano Momo, was only 300 meters from the epicenter inside a reinforced concrete building. She survived, but was injured by glass shards. Her case has been studied for decades. By the end of 1945, approximately 140,000 people had died from the immediate effects of the explosion, burns, wounds, and acute radiation sickness. However, this was only the beginning. Radioactive contamination continued to kill people for years and decades afterward. Nagasaki. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, a B-29 called Boxcar took to the skies. The initial target was Kokura, a major industrial center with an arsenal, but Kokura was covered by clouds and haze from the previous day's raids on a neighboring city. After 3 unsuccessful attempts, and with fuel running low, Commander Charles Sweeney decided to fly to the alternate target, Nagasaki. The second bomb was called Fat Man. It was an implosion bomb based on plutonium-239. It was more powerful, about 21 kilotons, but more technically complex. At 10:58 a.m., the bomb was dropped through a break in the clouds. Because the plane deviated from its course, the explosion occurred not over the city center, but over the industrial district of Urakami, 3 kilometers to the north. This mistake saved thousands of lives, as the hilly terrain partially protected the center of Nagasaki from the shockwave. Nagasaki was more important as an industrial center, home to Mitsubishi shipyards and factories producing torpedoes and military equipment. Dr. Takashi Nagai, a radiologist at Nagasaki Medical University, was 700 meters from the epicenter. He survived, but received a serious dose of radiation. His wife died. Despite suffering from radiation sickness, he continued to treat the injured and later wrote several important books about the bombing. He died in 1951 of leukemia caused by radiation exposure. By the end of 1945, about 70,000 people had died in Nagasaki. The total number of victims of both bombings by the end of the year was more than 210,000. Surrender and consequences. Even after 2 atomic bombings, the Japanese government could not come to a unanimous decision. The military wanted to continue the war, demanding the preservation of the imperial system and independent trials for war criminals. The country was on the verge of a military coup. On August 10th, at an emergency meeting of the Supreme Military Council, the votes were evenly divided, 3 in favor of surrender, 3 against. For the first time in modern Japanese history, Emperor Hirohito intervened personally and made the decision. The formal signing of the surrender document took place on September 2nd, 1945, aboard the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II was officially over, but the consequences were not. Radiation continued to kill for decades. Hibakusha was the name given to people affected by the disaster, who had a sharply increased risk of leukemia, thyroid cancer, lung cancer, and breast cancer. The peak of leukemia cases occurred in the 1950s, and solid tumors in the 1960s and 1970s. Many survivors suffered from genetic damage. The social consequences were enormous. Hibakusha faced discrimination. They were considered contaminated, were not hired for jobs, and no one wanted to marry them. It was not until 1957 that a law was passed providing medical care to the victims of the bombings. Many Hibakusha kept quiet about their status for years and decades. Supporters of the decision point to the lives saved during the invasion, Japan's fanatical resistance, and the fact that the war could have continued for months, claiming tens of thousands of lives each week from bombing and starvation. Critics say Japan was already on the verge of surrender, that the bombs were dropped in part to demonstrate power to the Soviet Union, and that the use of weapons of mass destruction against civilian targets is unjustifiable under any circumstances. Conclusion. Today, there are about 13,000 nuclear warheads in the world. Many of them are hundreds of times more powerful than Little Boy and Fat Man. The most powerful bomb ever tested, the Soviet Tsar Bomba in 1961, was 3,300 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Peace memorial museums have been built in Hiroshima and Nagasaki every year on August 6th and 9th at 8:15 and 10:58 a.m. A bell rings, and the city's residents observe a minute of silence. The museum's house charred children's belongings, melted bottles, melted coins, and photographs of victims. One of the most famous exhibits is a tricycle that belonged to 3-year-old Shin Tetsuya. He was playing on his bike in the yard when the bomb fell. His father buried him with his bicycle. 40 years later, the bicycle was exhumed and donated to the museum. The Hibakusha, whose numbers are dwindling, continue to tell their stories. They call themselves witnesses who must warn the world. Every year, their numbers decrease. The average age exceeds 85 years.